A Chicago University professor once told me years ago that life is about stories. Almost, if something is a story, it's relatable to. I think that's the basis of Hollywood. Michael Eisner espoused that when he ran Disney. And I think it's so true. And so if you were to understand the story of Tim Ferriss, and then you, within the context of that, the story of the folks that he interviews, if you were to, for example, do the same with Peter Attia, a fantastic medical doctor. Yeah, so it's a lot to do with this, not the stories, their theses, how they support them. These are brilliant but motivated and with a very strong desire to be impactful because they were impacted in their lives. And I think that's true for pretty much every person in some dimension that I've ever met that were profound in any way.
Hello, and welcome to Indian Explorers. In this podcast, we talk about Indian success stories. I am Sabrina, and together with my co-host Amit, we will get to understand the journey of our guests and what drives them. The optimism, patience, idealism, and courage are the attributes of theirs that we want to bring to life in our conversations with them. If you enjoy the show, please hit the subscribe button and share it with others. Hey, how's it going?
I'm doing well, Sabrina. How are you doing today?
Good. I have to admit, I'm a little nervous about our guest because I think he's smarter than the two of us put together, plus some.
Isn't that the case for all the previous guests?
Yeah, I guess so. Most of them have been like that. I'm not going to say who has. Just
Yeah.
kidding, no.
Well,
I
this guy
think
was
you're right. We
my
all
this guy was my boss in my first
Yeah.
job. So I'm actually looking forward to it. I think it's going to be fun. But before that,
Yeah.
Sabrina, what do you want Naima to become as a career? I know
You
it's
know,
your choice, but if you had a
yeah.
choice,
Ooh, if I had a choice, I find journalism to be really cool. I think she's good at speaking, but she's been telling me that she wants to be an interior designer or fashion designer. I mean, if she pursues that and she's good at it, why not?
yeah.
But if you're asking me what I would pick, I mean, right? Did I say the mom answer? I just want her to be happy, but
No,
I
no.
mean,
Give us what you really want. Do you want it to be a soccer star, or
I mean, ideally, could you imagine if I had a daughter who played on the U.S. women's national team? I mean,
yeah,
sure, let's do it.
that's the dream.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah. I was just thinking that because I had a conversation with my son last night, and he's changed his profession. From a YouTuber, he now wants to be a professional football player.
Like soccer or
Yeah.
American football?
No, he's never seen American football. So,
Okay.
football.
So now imagine both of our children being professional
Yeah,
European
I'll
soccer
settle.
players.
I'll settle for them taking over Indian Explorers from us in 20 years' time.
That's not hard to do.
Yeah. I was thinking about that because now that we're doing this podcast, I'm quite a lot on YouTube, and he wanted to originally be a YouTuber like Mr. Beast. And I always thought, I thought engineering would be cool. I thought, why, like you mentioned, smart people. I've always rated engineers. I don't know, for some reason. And then a couple days ago, I was reading a newsletter that I get, and it said something along the lines that the Panama Canal, where the ships go from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean and vice versa, that because of rain, shortage of rain in the Panama area, and the lakes have less water, that there are delays from, instead of 5-6 days, it's gone to 18 days. And I was thinking, what the hell? I was just blown away. I was thinking, what is a little bit of rain, water, got to do with the speed and the delays of the canal crossing? And that's why I got into a bit of research, and that's why my admiration for engineering came about. Are you familiar
Okay.
with how the canal actually works?
I'm actually not.
You're not? Neither was I. I mean, so what it is the ship enters a particular area, and they lock. It's like locked behind. And then what they do, they have these chambers, and in the chambers, they pump water in to lift the ship a certain height so that it goes to the next level. And it does that 3 times up to it reaches to the end of the canal. And these water chambers rely on the nearby lakes, so natural
Okay.
water, and the lakes rely on rainfall. So because of the drought, there's not enough water to pump into these chambers and lift the ships up. And I was like, who thinks of these things? Now, when you go the other way,
They were just cruising on the canal to get
yeah,
here.
no, even the Suez Canal, the one next to
Hmm.
Egypt, that is that's about 120 miles versus the Panama Canal, which is 50 miles. But the Suez Canal is easier. Now they have lock systems as well. But
Okay.
the fact that there's a lock system to lift up the ship. Here's my first
That's
general knowledge question for you. How much do you think the ship is lifted from A to B? How many meters of feet? Because I love your multiple choice answer. So give me a guess.
you don't want to give me like
No,
options to choose
no, 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 I don't. Think about
Okay.
it.
Well,
It's a ship
it's
that
gonna be
weighs.
okay. I work in feet here. Okay,
Okay, feet.
so I always give you the worst answers. Let's go. I'm gonna say how many feet is 100 yards? Do we know?
I don't know yards. Just give me feet or meters.
Let's do
I'm 1.8. I'm 1.8
300 feet.
meters. How many feet?
I don't know. 300 feet.
300 feet. Okay. That's a
It's a
lot.
lot.
That's a lot.
Oh,
Okay.
see?
So I'll give you the
Well, I
answer.
feel like it should be substantial.
It's 85 feet or 26 meters by the time it
Okay.
goes from one to the other. So because of
I
these,
was thinking in football fields. That's why I was like
yeah,
100 yards. Well, while you're telling me, I'm looking up.
yeah. So because of this and because of the shortage of water, instead of the average 38 to 40 ships that are crossing the canal every day, they've now limited it to 32. And the
Okay.
number of containers that can go into the ship also has been decreased, right? Because the
Wow. Yeah,
more
because of the weight.
because of the
Yeah.
weight, they have what's called the draft. The draft is
Okay.
the when the ship sinks below the water, that's called the draft. So
So
the
you think about climate change, like how, I mean, we're not even thinking about everything it impacts. Like this is dramatic.
Yeah. So okay, second multiple choice. What
Oh,
percentage
well,
of trade?
okay. Before you get to that one,
Yeah,
100 yards, which is an American football field, is 300 feet. That's what I said. I was thinking that much.
yeah, that's
But now you're saying it's almost a little under a third of
yeah,
that.
yeah, which I thought
Wow.
was staggering. Anyway, for a container ship that weighs a ton, many million, thousands of tons, for it to go up 85 feet because of water displacement, I thought that was,
Yeah, that's
I mean, it's,
substantial.
yeah. So what percentage
Question.
of trade goes through the canal for the US? So the amount of containers, so obviously
Okay.
ships go East Coast, West Coast, but what percentage of containers go through the Panama Canal?
Now, 40%.
That's exactly right, 40%.
So
That's
I'm
ex
not as bad as.
Okay,
Okay.
this one you're gonna get wrong. How many people died building the canal?
Ooh, I mean, zero.
27,000 people died
Oh no,
building
I
the
thought it was
canal.
gonna be like huge like that,
Yeah.
or
So the canal,
27,000?
yeah. So let me explain what happened. Um, to go through the Panama, it's quite a region full of mountains, right? It's not just a flat area. So there's a lot of explosives to make, the area, the holes. And then once you have bad weather, people died of malaria, mosquitoes, vomiting, bad backs. Viruses were created as well. Remember, this was 18 something, 1800,
Okay.
right? and security and construction was not really top notch back then. And the
Yeah.
French did it for 30 years, and they had about 22,000 deaths. And then they gave up the project for financial reasons and obviously human life. And then the Americans took over in 1904. And it took them 10 years. And in 10 years, they built it, and 5,000 people died, right? So 500 a year. And the project cost back then in 1904 to 1914, $350 million, which back then
Back
was the largest infrastructure investment in the history of your United States of America.
This is fascinating. This is really interesting. I must have been asleep in history class when we went over this.
Yeah, but the importance, the canal now is run by the Panamanians, by the Panama government. And guess what percentage of GDP it brings into the Panama economy?
70%, 75%.
3%.
Oh,
I caught you. But it's 6% of global trade,
okay.
right?
Right.
Do you remember a few years ago that evergreen ship that got stuck in the other canal, the one next to Egypt, the Suez Canal? You don't
No,
remember?
I don't.
The Suez Canal basically that connects the Red Sea to the Mediterranean,
Right.
right? So that's where all the cargo from Europe goes to Asia. So India and China, they go through that. They go through that because if not, they have to go all the way bottom of Africa, and that takes
And then,
forever, right? So the Suez Canal, I believe, is slightly more in volume than the Panama Canal in terms of
okay.
the impact, and that is 10% of the GDP of Egypt.
Okay.
Yeah, so
That's huge.
yeah, and 12% of global trade. Yeah,
That's,
no, it's
yeah.
amazing.
Yeah, I brought this up today. This is interesting.
And guess how many people died building that canal? And this was
I'm not taking this. Just
so
tell me.
this was built in it was ready in 1869.
Okay.
Just to give an idea, so 50 years even before that. So before Panama. So how
Just
many
tell me before I yell out a stupid answer.
this is a stupid number. This is a mind-blowing number.
What?
120,000 people.
I was gonna say like 50,000.
120,000 people.
Oh, all in the name of trade and capitalism.
Yeah, yeah. Anyway, so engineering it is. That's the moral of the story.
Engineering it is.
Yeah.
And I think our guest today knows a lot of really impressive engineers. I can't wait
Yes.
to introduce him right now. So today we have Carlos Bhola. He is an uber successful serial entrepreneur, investor, and executive in the technology sector. Not center, sector. He currently serves as managing director of Celsius Capital, an investment and advisory firm keying in on technology, auto, and healthcare life science industries. His portfolio of thriving companies is quite substantial, but I'd like to name a few. EachNet, acquired by eBay, Vonage, New York Stock Exchange IPO, where Carlos was co-founder and president, and Gate5, acquired by Nokia. He has previously held high-level positions at Credit Suisse and the Boston Consulting Group, and his most recent academic achievement is his pioneering research in artificial intelligence at Carnegie Mellon University. Welcome. How are you?
Hey, I'm good. I'm good. Sunny day here in the US.
Hi, Carlos.
Hey, Amit.
Did we miss anything from that brief intro?
Absolutely not. One can argue it's even too much.
Okay. Carlos,
No, I had to cut out a lot for time, only for time's sake, but it's an impressive bio.
Sure. Thanks.
Carlos, you were my first boss. Okay, technically it was Mark Odendaal, but as you know, he was our French MD of the European group, technology group at Credit Suisse in London, and he had 10 more French people in that group. And honestly, I was thinking of quitting banking until you and I were involved in the FreeSurf IPO. I'd love it if you told the story, how you remember it, because it was quite a while ago.
Sure. I mean, but first, I should say, maybe perhaps it's a reflection of my age, but I don't necessarily ascribe to the "I'm your first boss." one of my close friends and colleagues, Naval Ravikant, he always introduces me as his first boss, or so does Bo. And these are all, younger colleagues of mine over the years who I've been honored to have mentored. And I kind of think less of being the boss of you guys than actually today you guys being my boss, or more importantly, I would argue that I learned way more and you guys have done much better and had greater impact, which is my measure of success.
Maybe Naval, not me. Maybe Naval.
Well, sure. I mean, no, I think it's certainly the case for all of you. I could say that for Bo. I could say that for Naval. I mean, I'm just thrilled. Russell, my most recent protege, who's now at Scale AI, is just brilliant, beyond me. If I was talking to him this morning, yeah, I mean, context for the FreeServe IPO and for how I met you. We at the time were the leading technology banking group on the street. Frank Cutrone and the team had left. We went from Morgan Stanley to Deutsche Bank to Credit Suisse, and at the time I met you, I was at Credit Suisse. And we were really pioneering the true emergence of tech. When history is written, we will see the late 90s, early 2000s, what we call Web 1.0 is really the blowout period of tech. Of course, the more recent boom was followed. And in the US, we saw it first. We saw AOL at that time doing extremely well. And it occurred to me, as the guy who was running Internet and Electronic Commerce at the time, that the same can be said for almost any company that had broadband assets. And so, as you might recall, Amit, we did this little road show to the telecom companies in Europe: British Telecom, Deutsche Telekom, France Telecom, Telefonica, Telecom Italia. And quite frankly, we were all shown the door. And my memory of you, Amit, was I was on a British Airways flight flying back from London to New York. And in the magazine, the airline magazine, an advertisement caught my eye. It was orange and purple, these two intersecting ovals. And it was this company called FreeServe. It was the little logo. I'm sure you remember it.
I remember it.
I remember landing back in New York. Was it Boston or New York? I can't remember, but it was back in the US. It was like 5 in the afternoon or 6 in the afternoon or something like that. I remember calling you, and it was late at night. You were still at your desk. I'm like, hey, Amit. And literally there were MDs and all these fancy people in these meetings. And I remember calling at the time, the analyst. I have this gravitation to the younger, more innovative team members. And you said, yeah, don't you know FreeServe? It's this free ISP. And I'm like, what the hell are you talking about? It's a free ISP.
I said, it's AOL. I said, it's the AOL.
Yeah, you said it's AOL of UK, something like that. I remember. And I said, okay, well, do me a favor, run some analysis on this. And as I recall, it was a Tuesday I was coming back to, or a Wednesday I was coming back to the US. And literally that Thursday evening, I was back on a flight to London. And immediately after landing into London, went into Mayfair, and we had the pitch to FreeServe. And everybody at the time was telling FreeServe they had a fraction of the equity value of what they had at the time. And you were one of the few people that actually understood the logic and the math for why this, even though it was a free ISP. Anyway, it's a long, wonderful story, one of many in my career that I've been very fortunate to be a part of. But it ended up turning into the FreeServe IPO and then subsequently the sale of FreeServe. But yeah, it was a great experience that kicked off my and your relationship.
Yeah,
and,
I remember it slightly different. I remember my girlfriend dumped me. I was sleeping in the gym for like 6 days in a row. Not 1 week, but 2-3 weeks in a row. My girlfriend said, what's the point? We don't really have a relationship. I thought there was a pivotal moment in my life because it was the first time I was excited doing something. Like it meant something to me, right? And I thought it was important. I remember doing the presentation to why a company with less than 3 years operating history can be and should be dual listed in the London Stock Exchange and not just lose it to the NASDAQ. And you actually went to pitch that with some European guys, and you actually got the London Stock Exchange to get it done. So for me, that was history. That was incredible.
Well, it was history. You're absolutely right, Amit. And, it was a pioneering moment. I think we did 3 things that were fundamentally different at that time. First and foremost, FreeServe was part of the Dixon's group, and it was a corporate, actually, entrepreneuring effort from John Pluthero and the team. And so we demonstrated that a corporate venturing can actually work. These guys, they did not have a lot of revenue, but they were certainly adding tremendous value to customers that over time would become revenue focused. I think the second thing that we did was really innovative at the time, was exactly what you just said. We convinced the London Stock Exchange to change their rules. I think prior to that, companies had to be 3 years profitable and of a certain size. And we actually argued the growth versus profitability thing. But the third thing we did, and I think it's the thing that I'm the most proud of, is, and I think it's something that has earmarked my life, quite frankly, in business. It's looking across geographies. We saw AOL at that time was trading at a significantly high multiple of value of a subscriber, and no value was even a fraction was being attributed to the value of a subscriber. And in fact, we took the company public on the value of subscribers. And as you probably can recall, the Financial Times, I think, wrote an article about me once back in those days about the suave Latino banker who showed up in London. You remember that famous story? I never lived it down.
Brown
Because
skin
nobody
Latino.
believed. Yeah, nobody believed, and here we were pioneering stuff. So, and I have to say as much thanks to you, Amit. You did the original work. I mean,
Yeah, and
I got the orange and purple impetus, but you gave me the economics to make it work. So thank you.
wasn't FreeSurf part of like that retailer Dixon and Dixon's
Yes,
bankers?
that's right.
Wasn't it Goldman Sachs or Morgan Stanley?
Yeah, I'm not in the business of knocking the other banks, but
Well,
yes, it was the
I am, because they
larger
both
utilities
rejected
you just
me.
mentioned.
They both rejected me. So I am in the business of knocking them. And also, Carlos, I was 21 or 22 years old. And normally the analyst doesn't get involved in the IPO and the roadshow. And it was thanks to you, I flew the Concorde twice at 22, British Airways first class. I was meeting Fidelity, Putnam, and all these big boys. And I was like, who the hell is this guy, sitting in these meetings? So honestly, you gave me that, I don't know if the word is confidence, but you gave me that push, because after the FreeSurf IPO, we did the QXL, the auction company. And then a month after that went public, I quit and started a company with Sabrina's brother. So honestly, you really got me in the right mindset, and now I'm still in technology. So I owe you a lot. Sorry, Sabrina, I know it's a lot of history.
No, I'm enjoying this
Yeah.
story, hearing how you guys first started. It's exciting. I wanted to ask you, you've worked at Credit Suisse, Boston Consulting Group, you've invested, you've founded companies. What is your preferred role? Is it investor? Is it, negotiating deals, operating? What's what is your forte, and then what do you enjoy the most?
Good question.
It's a great question, and as with many of the great questions, I'm not sure I've got an answer, much less a great answer. What I will do is and Naval, we mentioned earlier, has helped me a lot with understanding this, as is another great protege of mine, Bo Shao, my intellectual twin. I think that what constitutes success changes over time. I think, having come from a very modest background, literally the sustenance was my first, establishing sustenance was sort of my first measure of success. But I, especially as I get older, and certainly for quite a few decades now, I recognize that a lot of my success actually comes from having been mentored and being mentored. And so I have this, I think by osmosis, from youth, from my mother having taught me this, always being taken under the wings of folks that are more accomplished than I am. And I've benefited tremendously throughout my life with that. But at a relatively early age, started doing that. I thank the Boston Consulting Group for formalizing that with me. So at the Boston Consulting Group, when I was there, we had these sort of levels of accomplishments. There were associates who were undergraduates that came in for a couple of years, and there were consultants, people who came freshly out of the foremost business schools. And then you became what we called a qualified case leader or project leader, a manager, and a partner. Those were the only levels. And I remember that in order to become a partner, you had to have mentored folks. Mentorship was really important. And everybody, as you went up the hierarchy, you had mentors. I only went to the Boston Consulting Group because of a mentor, Tom Hout. And so from that point, I started mentoring folks. And I could tell you, it is probably the thing that I'm the most proud of in my career. And it's probably the skill that I'm the most proud of having. And Amit is a good example of that. um, all of my all of my proteges, and even post BCG into banking and into investing and building companies, all of my proteges have gone on to become not only stellar professionals, but remarkable people. I'll just give you a simple example to demonstrate that point. And so this is the role I like to play. I only know three things really well. I understand strategy very well. I understand relationships very well. And I understand technology and capital very well. But the wrapper around that is really truly mentorship.
But Sabrina's question was investor, deal maker, or operator, and you
Yeah,
brought in a fourth. You brought in mentorship.
Which is
Yeah,
great.
but I think it stitches across all of those. I don't think you can be a very good investor. Remember, when you're investing, you're not the founder. You're not the CEO. You're not the manager. You're not the chief engineer. You're not the head customer service representative. But what you can do, in addition to bringing capital to a company, is help to guide the strategy, especially as things change. But what you're more importantly doing is guiding people within the context of those elements: capital, strategy, customer relationships, etc. So I think that I'm comfortable playing a functional role. I'm not sure I'd be a great customer service person. I'm not sure I love HR, for example. So we can eliminate those. But the roles that I've chosen to excel at over the years: investor, board member, company builder, co-founder, but most importantly, mentoring. I'm much more comfortable in that role.
I love it.
I,
And
I hope I answered your question.
no, I think it's a beautiful answer. And especially so, the guests that we've had on the show have always talked about, one of the things that makes them successful is being coached or mentored. It seems to be a theme across our show, which is based on success. So I love that you brought that up.
Let me tell you what kind of a connected world we're in. I'll tell you right now that without Naval, we're not speaking today, and I'll tell you why. The Naval Ravikant did a podcast with Shane Parrish. Shane Parrish has this podcast
Mhm.
called The Knowledge Project. I promised
Yep.
you that podcast and that episode is the reason why I'm a podcaster. Because
Is that right?
because I heard that episode of Naval, and ever since I heard that episode, I have not stopped. I now do more podcasting. I listen to more podcasts than read books or watch TV. So that episode, listening to Naval, how he gave up alcohol because he wanted to go to the gym in the morning, his reading routine because his mom would leave him in the public library, and everything about that episode, I related it to such a level, but it was a strong emotional connect that I've never had with another episode or TV. So I tell you, without Naval, I would not be doing this podcast or have invited Sabrina to do this.
That's fascinating. I thought you were going to tell the story of without Naval, for example, with Tim Ferriss, not a close friend of ours, of Naval's. Tim is a brilliant guy, just a phenomenal human being, one of the best human beings I've ever met in my life, and just a great guy, just a very impactful human being. And I would have thought you would have said it was because of Tim's podcast. But I will also tell you, I'll send you another podcast that will probably inspire you as much as the one with Naval. Another one of my mentors, I've mentioned him already in this, Bo Shao, Chinese immigrant,
Send
Chinese
it over.
American today. And the Bo Shao's interview with Tim Ferriss builds on that. And so, I'm sorry, whether it's, I can literally wax on about my proteges, but these are great. You, Amit, is like that. I mean, so
You know what?
super proud.
Am I the only one that didn't fall in love with Tim Ferriss's book? Was it 4 hour, 4 week? What's the book called?
Yeah, he has this 4 hour work. Yeah,
Yeah,
but
the 4 day week or whatever
yeah.
it was. I read it, but it didn't blow me away. I didn't connect. Obviously, I like his podcasts and his newsletters, but sometimes they're like legs. They're a bit too deep. I prefer Joe
If you
Rogan, a bit lighter.
well, if you understand, just like you resonated with Naval's story, if you know Tim's story, and then you use that as the basis, it's a Chicago University professor once told me years ago that life is about stories. Almost, if something is a story, it's relatable to. I think that's the basis of Hollywood. Michael Eisner espoused that when he ran Disney. And I think it's so true. And so if you were to understand the story of Tim Ferriss, and then you, within the context of that, the story of the folks that he interviews, if you were to, for example, do the same with Peter Attia, a fantastic
Or Steve
medical
Jobs.
doctor. Yeah, so it's a lot to do with this, not the stories, their theses, how they support them. These are brilliant but motivated and with a very strong desire to be impactful because they were impacted in their lives. And I think that's true for pretty much every person in some dimension that I've ever met that were profound in any way.
Carlos, you're a great storyteller. I'm just sitting here listening. I'm like, that's great. Can we move on to AI, your research
Sure.
in AI? Can you tell us what your research entails?
And your
In a,
thoughts on Sam, what's his name? Altman? What's his name?
Altman? Yeah.
Yeah, and
Sam Altman.
Yes, I'm
and who's
Altman.
going to win? Who's going to win the AI war? Google, Microsoft?
So I'm not sure I would consider myself to be the best prognosticator on AI. One of my mentors today, Russell Kaplan, who's at Scale AI, he is today orders of magnitude more brilliant than I am in the state of AI, in the current state of AI. He's more recently, he's also a fraction of my age and much more recently
But
graduated
does it scare
from
you?
Stanford.
Does AI scare
No,
you,
but
or are
let me
you
put
an
some
optimist?
context. I'll give you some context. So I got into AI as a means of solving hard problems. So my specific area of research in AI was spatial reasoning. Humans reason with time, temporal reasoning, and they reason with space. We don't realize it, but we innately reason with space. Whether we're walking in the street or whether we're looking at a room, how to organize stuff. If you're writing text on a piece of paper, you're actually reasoning. You're doing spatial reasoning. Spatial placement or movement of any and all things is spatial reasoning, and your mind does that automatically. That's what I studied. Applications of that were things like, we call them autonomous land vehicles, what we know today as autonomous navigation. Back then, the DARPA, the Defense Department, had funded Carnegie Mellon's autonomous land vehicle program. That's why a lot of autonomous navigation comes out of Whitaker's lab at Carnegie Mellon, CMU. Another example of use of spatial reasoning is placement of text and objects on page. So pagination, when you use Microsoft Word, when you use PowerPoint, there's spatial reasoning that's happening there. And so that was my area of study and remains my passion. I love maps. I will forever love maps. So much of what I do revolves around location intelligence. And in my era of AI, we were constrained by three things. One is, you'll always hear me mention three things because that's a BCG, or three things. One was we didn't really understand human cognition as well as we did, to be quite honest. And so today we understand that better. We had wet scientists that were studying the actual brain, the physiology of the brain to better understand neural networks, for example. And we had computer scientists like myself that was studying the information theoretic aspects of the human brain. We didn't understand it as well. The second is we didn't have software tools to be able to encode as well as we did. So you literally, to get something done, you have to build this whole stack of tools to be able to actually physically get two objects to move or to interrelate in a meaningful way. And quite frankly, the third was processing power was just not available. So if you remember, we were doing AI to solve hard problems, things like factoring primes, things like trying to, even though that's not a solvable problem, but things like placement of 2D bin packing, or chess was another good example, hard problems. And so we need compute power, software tools, and understanding of cognition, which was infantile compared to now. Today, if you look at what folks do today, and especially with the cloud-based infrastructure that's out there, and the knowledge that we have about human cognition, it's several orders of magnitude greater than what it was when I was doing AI 1.0, so to speak. So I'm optimistic about AI. I think it's very, very much further along than it was. I think it's also overhyped. I think they're significantly more overpromising than is meaningfully relevant there. I think some of the folks that are advantaged have not shown their hands for a variety of reasons. Big companies are worried about things like antitrust and perceptions of monopoly behavior. But it will unlock tremendous innovation. As with every technology that comes along, there is an ugly underbelly. Remember social networking, we all loved it until we started to realize it can be used to manipulate political systems and public discourse, perversely so. And we didn't project that. I would even argue the smartphone, this brilliant device that Nokia and Steve anointed us. If we understood what the effects were, gosh, how would we have constrained it? We just simply couldn't predict it. And AI will be like that. When you have a technology like that, you can put it in the hands of the larger, wider global community. We're going to see all kinds of applications of it, some that oppose and some that support, or the moral codes that we all live with. I am not pessimistic, even though I can see that the underbelly can be uglier because of the power of this technology. I'm not pessimistic about AI as others do. I do think we have to put safeguards in place. I think we have to ensure that folks that are exploiting, leveraging, and practicing those capabilities do so responsibly. But I don't think the answer is curbing technology. I think the answer is in trying to do what Bo and Naval, I mentioned earlier, are doing. Have folks be more conscious. Have folks understand the very beauty, power, and engender a love for humanity. And then have that manifest itself in the things that we do. You know, I always say Steve Jobs most people that talk about Steve Jobs talk about him in the context of what a brilliant product producer he was. The iPhone and Pixar and iPad and iPod and the Macintosh line, etc. And these are beautiful, phenomenal products that have changed our lives. But what Steve will be remembered, I think, for 200 years, 2,000 years from now, is he will have engendered humanity's appreciation and love for design, for aesthetics, more than anybody else has. And Steve Jobs was not a designer. He was not a fashion or a movie director or any of these things in his own right. But he had this aesthetic that really came together in his mind that we collectively can look at and go, gosh, isn't this beautiful? And he did that by, some was absorption from other examples of great design, but some of it is in engendering that in humanity and literally encoding his humanity into his products. So imagine if we were to do that with AI. Imagine if we were to engender morality. Imagine if we were to engender love for humanity into the very folks that are purveying and disseminating AI and AI's capabilities that are out there. Then you get real optimistic. And so for me, what the folks that we mentioned so far on this call are doing, Tim Ferriss, Peter Thiel, these are the folks I happen to know and like a lot. Bo Shao, Naval, if we can get more of those folks going in that direction, I think we're good to go. And to be honest, I think some of the folks that are getting knocked are people that are being suspect in that regard. I actually do think the current leaders of the AI wave are more conscious of that because they came immediately after having seen the ugly underbelly of the previous generation, which was mobility and social networking. So the Sam Altmans of the world, the Elon Musks of the world, I actually do genuinely think these folks mean better. And I also love that the AI wave also is more diverse. I don't mean to be specific or preposterous in any way, but it's not a whole bunch of young white males pushing this. It's a really wonderful, diverse, representative group of people in the world.
So let's talk about Elon Musk. Is he going to be remembered for driverless cars? Is he going to be remembered for colonizing Mars? The Neuralink, boring tunnel? What is your friend Elon Musk going to be remembered for? Because right now, everyone's just talking about Twitter and his crazy, mood swings.
I think that successful folks, especially hyper successful folks, suddenly become cult of personality. And human nature divides in many ways along a wide spectrum, but the two extremes are a whole bunch of people get jealous or envious of them or want to bring them down, and a whole bunch of people want to be like them and support them irrespective of their flaws. And I don't think Elon is any different than you, Amit, or he is me. He's a human that cares tremendously for what he's doing and what we are all doing. And he has some phenomenal skills. I mean, he has demonstrated as a human being some extreme off the charts, brilliant traits. I think that first and foremost, before we talk about what Elon will be remembered for, I think we should recognize what Elon has done. Elon accelerated the move consciousness, arguably in many ways, practically more so than Al Gore did, the move towards sustainability. And I don't mean sustainability in this, red, green, liberal, banging drum thing. But he brought a complete rethinking to the very precept of movement of people and movement of things, which happens to be a significant producer of carbon in planet Earth, but which is actually done very inefficiently. If you think about the average car that was being produced pre-Tesla, and you compare it today, it's orders of magnitude improved. And Elon catalyzed that. He brought forth that earlier than pretty much anybody else did. He wasn't the original guy to create the Tesla sports car, but he Roadster, but he literally went and accelerated that with a combination of strategy, risk taking, and technology and capital. And so we should all be very grateful for that. Whether even folks that are in big auto companies. I think when we look at some of the other things that Elon has done, I happen to be a space buff. I happen to be a smaller investor in these guys. I'm a huge fan of what he's done with SpaceX. We were launching expensive vehicles into space and starting to do this crazy stuff with rockets. He did something that was remarkable. He brought it back and he made it reusable. Whether he gets to Mars in my lifetime, I don't know. I hope he does. He's brought, even if you look at communications and how communications is done with the internet and how that can impact planet Earth in terms of comprehensive availability. If his low orbit satellites networks actually fly in the way that he expects them to, at the cost and price points that he will, gosh, that would be a tremendous to the plethora of human tools that we can use today. So I
You
don't
sound
know
like a fan.
No, I'm not trying to be a fan or trying to not be a fan. What I'm doing
I'm a
is
fan. I'm a fan.
well, and again,
Yes.
I don't like or dislike Elon per se. I probably like him more than I dislike him, but I don't dislike Elon for any reason. But I'm very prone to thinking about what people do, what their motivations are, and more importantly, what their impact is. It's really important to measure impact. Deliverables are important. And by deliverables, yes, of course, he overstates sometimes. Yes, you may have a problem with some aspects of his personality. I don't, but others might. But he has been very impactful and he's delivered. And I think that's to be admired, at least in my book.
Carlos, you've delivered over and over when it comes to innovative companies. What will you be remembered for?
I hope I'll be remembered for two things, or probably three. First, having morally and accurately embodied the principles that my mother and my father taught me from when I was a child. I would argue that was my first lesson, and it continues to be the backbone of who I am. Warren Buffett once used these terms, and I absolutely ascribe to them. I won the DNA lottery, and I will forever be thankful for that. The second thing I would like to be remembered for is for having what I said earlier, having mentored, encouraged, supported group of very talented, amazing humans to have gone on and done greater impact. Amit probably doesn't remember this, but when I took him on as a protege, I tell all my proteges one thing. I say, if there's one thing I give you, it will be the biggest gift in your life, is to not make one mistake, ideally a mistake that I made before. If I provide you just one mistake avoidance, that's the greatest gift I can give you. It turns out it's turned into much more over the years. So I would want to be remembered for that. And I think the third thing I'd want to be remembered for is that every company I've guided, every company I've invested in, every company I've created, and it's absolutely the case for this new company that I've got in stealth right now, which for the first time is in the life sciences area, has every single one of those companies has created and been impactful to a much wider demographic than anybody imagined it. So an example is Vonage, you mentioned earlier. When we founded Vonage, I remember people coming to us and telling us after Web 1.0, you guys are crazy. Internet has crashed, telecom has crashed, and you creating a internet telecom company. What's
I
wrong?
thought you were crazy. I thought you were crazy.
Everybody thought we were
Yeah.
crazy. And I pointed out to people, well, we're not, because we know broadband is going to be penetrated. We know telecom is being done extremely inefficiently. So, gosh, the first broadband app, a natural thing would be internet, would be telecom. And I remember we'd started a company. We were based in Edison, New Jersey. Edison, New Jersey is remarkable because it was the highest concentration of Indians outside of India on planet Earth. It was this little community in New Jersey that's, fully Indian. And
Yeah,
I know
there.
many Indians have. And our marketing lady, a wonderful woman, she grew up in Queens. She was working with us in Edison. And she says, you know what? Can't we do this, across countries? And I'm looking at her going like, what, really? And our innovation was technology and all that kind of stuff. But the biggest innovation we had, we were the first company to offer what we call all-you-can-eat calling, or what we know as subscription calling. Today, all telecom plans are subscription. Nobody pays by calls anymore. Back in those days, you used to in the US, and people paid an exorbitant amount. And we said, yeah, of course, as long as you have an internet access, you can do that. And I always point out to people, I think the first 60% of the 60% of the first million subscribers that we had at Vonage, they were Indian. And do you know why? Because Indian immigrants at the time used to cost a lot to call back to their parents and their families. And so Indian immigrants realized, shoot, if we have one Vonage phone in the US and one Vonage phone in India, then we could talk for as long as we want with these guys, all you can eat plan, right? And so people would come in and buy two. But what it did is it unlocked communications for the masses. It was brilliant. When 9/11 happened, we provided telecom services into ground zero because we were IP based, we were internet based, that others couldn't do. And so I hope that I will be remembered for always having gone on the third dimension, is having done the next thing. But the next things that have been successful have been highly impactful across a wide demographic. If I can do that, I feel really good about it. It happens that we make money in the process, so that's always useful.
That's interesting. I wanted to get your thoughts, your unique perspective on Google. I believe Lina Khan is now trying to break it up. Whether she wins or not, I'm not sure. I believe they still have 92%, market share of search in not just America but the world. Some say they're too powerful. With I don't know how Kikin is going. It's something that you started. I'm not too sure if it's a search that competes with Google or not. But I wanted your thoughts on that whole sector.
Sure. So Kikin was a company that we started, and because of Kikin, I should have a bias against Google.
That's what
The reason is, I understand that's why you're asking the questions. Well, Kikin was very simple. Here's a mobile phone. Actually, this is an Android phone, and our thesis was very simple. Imagine if you're reading an article and something piques your curiosity, and you want to ask a question about that. You want to know something a little bit more. Instead of hopping out of the article, going into search, typing it in, that was back in the day, I'm talking about in the 2011, 2012 period, right? Wouldn't it be great if you could just take your finger and long press on it, and what would pop up would be highly contextually relevant information. So for example, if I'm reading an article about Brian Rogers, right, who was our CTO, and he was writing some cool software for Kikin. If I long pressed on Brian Rogers, I want stuff about Brian Rogers, the CTO of Kikin, not Brian Rogers, who at that time was one of a famous MMA wrestler, to come up if I went into Google search, but I want it to be ease of accessing that. It's what we call touch to search. Simple, seamless method. And we actually did this in partnership with Microsoft's Bing, where one of my classmates and colleagues, Chi Lu, was running Bing back in those days. And Google didn't like that, obviously, because we very quickly demonstrated that we were surfing just from ease of use and high contextuality. We were surfing searches away from them on mobile devices, and B, a percentage of mobile searches have what is called economic interest, have economic impact, right? So N% of all searches, it has an economic driver associated with it, has an ad that's actionable associated with it. And we were starting to do really well. We were doing this based on Bing's, by the way, search engines, but on Google's Android phones. And we had fantastic partners. I remain forever thankful for the folks at Vodafone, the folks at HTC, the folks at Samsung, etc. And we did not succeed because of Google's how they no, not only dominance, but I hesitate to use these words because I should have every reason to dislike Google, and I don't. And so, long story short, one would argue. So to answer your question about Kikin, what's fascinating about the Google antitrust case to me is this whole thesis. When Microsoft had gotten into trouble, remember they got into trouble for bundling and using one product to pull through the other, but there was revenue associated with those products. Google has done something that's remarkable, and I love their tagline. At Kikin, our tagline was "Touch to Search." Their tagline, which is "Organize the world's knowledge and make it available to everyone," is brilliant, and they've done that. They've done the impact Google has had on humanity is unbelievable and continues to be unbelievable. And so the question becomes, is that now become a utility, and should it be regulated, or should it continue to be fostered in the way it is? I'm not so sure I'm qualified to answer that question. I'm also not sure that I'm willing to state that Google has done something that's illegal, certainly in the interpretation of the law that Lena, et cetera, would probably be pushing. But what I will say is it's important that regulators keep a constant eye on any attempts to suppress innovation. I'm a fan of innovation, and I would argue Google has enabled innovation in many, many ways. But as it pertains to their big companies' core products, sometimes they do suppress in indirectly or directly, and those efforts should be taken a close look at. So I'm not sure
I thought
the details on Google anymore, but I would say that I understand both sides of that argument.
I thought you were going to say too big, break it up. But then again, if they were broken up, would they have been able to do what they've done, which is, I don't know any other company that has multiple billion people using their products. YouTube, Google Drive, Gmail, billion plus. Maybe Facebook and Instagram now has, two products, but Google has how many people use Google every day? Google Docs.
No, but I think you're right. Today you can make that statement. But what's interesting is for those of us that are in the business, I could have told you, and not because I'm Nostradamus, but I could have told you in 2000 and when did we leave Credit Suisse, and I was on the board of Fast Search and Transfer. I could have probably told you in 2003, 2004, 2005, certainly by 2009 or 10, that Google would have the dominance that it has today. And the reason is, if you kind of think about it, search unlocks every and anything on planet Earth. And Google owned Chrome at the time. This is pre-Android, as the gateway through that. And it was, by the way, a much better, back then it was Mozilla and Google that was much better than Microsoft's Explorer, and it still is. And so if you combine those two things, then what you have, if you think about it, is you're establishing a portal to the vast majority of humans access to and use of the world's knowledge. That is a very powerful thing. I mean, so if you can establish scale over that is way more important than we are all PowerPoint or Word users, with all due respect. And so the fact that was not considered at that point, and guardrails were not discussed, regulators did not discuss that with Google. And by the way, the same is true for Facebook at that time, or by the time they did that, they were very large. And I could tell you my thesis around these companies having learned from Microsoft and having had brilliant lobbying efforts that made sure that there wasn't significant scrutiny. That I would tell you actually happened during those periods. But I think to tie two things together, Google and AI again, Google is arguably one of the best positioned to dominate in AI. What is really cool about it is that regulators, through the efforts of Elon and Sam and these guys, and gals, the regulators are actually looking at it sufficiently early before those dominant players show up. And that's what we can learn from the Google experience, from the Facebook experience, and from the Microsoft experience. And that's super important. And by the way, what's interesting is we've not seen those kind of attempts on Apple, but I would argue Apple has the same phenomenon because they do own the gateway to everything in your life. Remember, you have two lives. You have your real
That's
life.
in America. That's in America. They have monopoly.
This is an Android phone. This is a Google phone, by the way.
Yeah.
Testament to how I'm not a disparaging of Google. So,
got it.
but globally, Apple's as a portal into that. So anyway, it's a long way to say that I don't like to opine on things like that I don't know about, but also be despite the fact that I was bitter and angry at Google for a period. Look, I respect what they do, and I respect Sundar.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I have so many questions, Sabrina. I don't know. We're not doing very well time-wise.
Yeah, we need to meet for lunch or dinner one day.
Yeah,
Talk
yeah.
about it and record it. But I do want to ask you, we ask all our guests, what is your definition of success?
I've already covered that with mentorship.
Well, no, my definition of success, that is a skill. I think of mentorship, but mentorship does drive it. My definition of success today would be impact, having a significant impact. Today, for example, this new company that I'm focused on aspires to provide drugs for very, very important health issues in a much more effective way, globally at a much better. Humans can have higher efficacy of treatment, much lower toxicity, and greater overall benefit and cost. And we aspire to not do that in the United States and in Western Europe, where folks are willing to pay for leading edge medicines. But we want to, just like Tony Hsieh did at Zappos, we want to, for every one that we get paid for, we provide access to others. And for me, I think impact is the way I define success. I think that I would like everything I do, I ask myself, am I impactful? Am I impacting the degradation of what I view as the greatest threat to humanity and the greatest disease that we suffer from, which is opportunity disparity? People talk about wealth disparity. I think in the West, we really care a lot about wealth disparity. I actually think wealth disparity is a result of opportunity disparity. And if we can provide opportunity, if we can provide access, if we can provide availability to any and all humans who was born into this right of life, then, and I don't mean that in an anti-abortion way, I just realized I used a catchphrase there, but that wasn't what I meant.
Affirmative action.
No, so for me, the way I define success, every company that I work with, every team that I work on, every product that I'm a part of helping to put out there into the marketplace, I ask myself, either through the functions and features of that product or service, or through the business model that's associated with that product or service, can we have a significant impact, both with regards to availability and with regards to improvement of one's life? If we can do that, then I feel really thrilled. And I don't care whether it's a Oreo cookie, well, which is not a very good thing, but or a smartphone, or for this thing that I was just mentioning to you, a better and faster and cheaper way to deliver medicines that obviates a lot of the costs and craziness that's in the current pharma system. If we can do that, I would be thrilled.
So speaking of impact, what worries you the most? Global warming, Ukraine, Russia war, China possibly invading Taiwan, or another Trump presidency? Like, what keeps you up at night?
None of those keep me up late at night.
What does?
Because they're all beyond my I cannot move the needle on any of those. Of those, I would probably say global warming is probably the one that would worry me the most of those three. I don't think China invades Taiwan. The United States presidential system is in a presidential elections are in a messy state right now. I think we can feel better, more candidates that are more in tune with some of the principles I was espousing earlier on both sides of the aisle. I guess I got to wait a few cycles before we get there. And Russia and Ukraine, I think this is, I think eventually cooler heads will prevail, unfortunately, after tremendous cost. But the thing that keeps me up the most, in fact, it's something I really feel I can impact, and I am doing everything in my in my latter years, as I ramp down in my life, I'm actually doing more giving than taking. And I'm giving to removal of opportunity disparity. I want to be known, and I want everybody around me to be known for having impacted humans. We can, a simple example of giving, we do this at Burning Man as an example, is it's an impact that I had, something that I took that propelled my career was when I was in high school. A NASA engineer gave a speech at my high school. And I remember being so enraptured by this gentleman's speech that it first reinforced in me that, this weird, nerdy scientific path that I loved and cared for in physics and math was the right way to go. But I was inspired. And for me, he actually created an opportunity that I didn't even know existed. That, gosh, I can go off and there's this realm of things that if I plot a path and back then we didn't have internet. So I wrote him a letter and he wrote me back. And I think the worst thing he ever did was give me his address because I kept bombarding him with letters. But to me, he gave me an opportunity. And it could be something as simple as that to, like I mentioned earlier, building a product like Elon is building, or so many Jeff Bezos is doing, and so many other Andy Jassy now are doing, to really try to, I wouldn't say flatten the curve, but make these opportunities more prevalent, more available. What we will do is, I think the world will be a richer place because we're going to start to unlock potential that is currently hidden or that is entirely buried today. There's some little kid in some corner of planet Earth who can be the next Elon Musk if given that opportunity. And there's not one, but there are probably thousands of them. And so if we can do that as an objective in everything that we do, I think it'd be great. So that's how I define impact. And as a function of that, that's what worries me is if you have too much power aggregated in the hands of too few people who do not have those intentions, then there will be a perpetuation of that opportunity disparity. And then when people lose, when they become desperate, when they are in despair, then their lives, their bodies, their very being become weapons of destruction. That's my worst fear, because I've seen that happen too often. And we've got to stop that. And it's a really major problem right now. For example, in the United States, we can see that without even going beyond our borders.
Carlos Bhola 2024. Can
Vivek Ramaswamy, hello.
Do you, you're busy, you're traveling
Sure.
a lot. Do you have a lifestyle strategy you use for balance, for managing everything?
Oh gosh, that's a really great question. And I would say that I'm only now evolving that. I've been consuming a lot of the inputs from some great medical professionals. And I'm also acutely aware of my family's predilection for cardiovascular disease. So those are key thoughts in my head now. But I have, I do things today that I didn't do in the past. I very much ameliorate things like alcohol intake, and I eat extremely healthily. I'm a fiend for eating properly. But I don't actually pay as much attention to my well-being, my physical well-being, as I probably should and probably will in the future. I actually think that if you're in a great state mentally and spiritually, you can cheat a little bit on the physiological element. And so I focus on being excited, being happy, being optimistic, trying to be grounded with all the wonders of the world that's around me, the universe provides me. And secondarily, I focus on spending time on, keeping my corpus in good shape. So
no cold plunge baths.
I'm not a cold guy. I'm from South America, man. We like the warmth. The cold doesn't do it for me entirely.
Got it. Sabrina, should we get into the rapid fire
Yeah,
given the time?
do it. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you want to go first?
Okay. Yeah, I'll do it.
Sorry, Carlos, these
So
are rapid fires. Keep your answers as short as possible, please.
Mhm. Sure.
first thing that pops to your head. First thing you do or think about in the morning.
First thing I think about, it's my mother.
Oh, I love that.
Okay. A bad habit you are trying to get rid of.
Staying up too late.
What time do you go to bed usually?
It varies, but this morning I went to bed at 2 a.m.
Okay. Next thing on your bucket list you would want to check off.
On my bucket list, I want to check off building a company that impacts 10 million people in its first year of existence.
Okay. If you had to go for dinner with Nikki Haley, Robert Kennedy, or Vivek Ramaswamy, who would you go with and why?
Nikki Haley, Vivek Ramaswamy, or
Robert
I,
Kennedy?
I would probably pass on all three, but probably Vivek, because I would probably try to encourage Vivek to be a little bit more rounded and grounded, and his message will come through. Lean out, and his message would come through a little bit clearer.
I like that. Your celebrity crush.
My celebrity crush, Meryl Streep.
Oh, good one.
Good one.
I like her.
If I gave you a board in New York Times Square, and on that board you could draw, write your legacy, what would it say?
If I could draw or write my legacy on a board, I would probably say spend more time thanking the universe than extracting from the universe.
Nice.
That's a good one. Beautiful one. Do you have siblings, by the way?
Yes.
Okay.
4 sisters and 2 brothers.
Oh, wow.
I have a question, Carlos. I don't remember whether you went to meet with the richest man in the world back then, Bernard Arnault, or one of his companies. Did he acquire Playboy? Because I remember the Playboy CEO was Hugh's daughter, and you had a meeting with her, and you were advising her. Can you just tell us about that story? Because I remember it was quite interesting, but I don't remember the details.
So both Bernard Arnault at LVMH, who was not the richest man on planet Earth then, he only actually relatively recently became the richest man on planet Earth, but one of the most brilliant men that I've been very honored to have worked with and I call a friend. Just an amazing guy. I can wax on about him ad infinitum. I tremendously respect him, which is weird for a tech guy to have been as close to a non-tech guy as it was. But no, Playboy was a different initiative and had nothing to do with
Is it still on? Is Playboy still running?
I don't know who owns it now, but at the time I was the banker of Playboy. Playboy at the time was grappling with going from effectively a print publication into, as Chrissy Hefner at the time, she said she needed to go from the living room into the bedroom because Playboy was so at that point acceptable. It sat in dentists' offices and in living rooms, and remember, Playboy had made its future in the bedroom, and so her strategy change to that was broadband, television at the time, buying Spice TV when adult entertainment was coming on to the broadband channels, and then also transitioning away from Playboy print business to the online business. And a little known statement was a little known secret back in my days was we hired Kevin Mayer to be head of Playboy Online, which we were planning on taking public. Kevin went on to become the number 3 guy at Disney and is one of the most formidable media executives and a great guy. Today he has his own firm with Blackstone's backing. So yeah,
so that was the story.
World. And Chrissy was an amazing CEO. That was the story.
Yeah. I know we should wrap up, but I have another question.
Yeah, sure.
You've invested in China. You've invested in Russia. You've invested in America. You've invested in Europe. is it just a numbers thing, or how do you make your decision? Are there any cultural differences that you have to take into account when making these decisions?
Yes and no. So any business, any enterprise, anything I do in my life, quite frankly, I apply what I call my 3 Ps, and I can apply my 3 Ps philosophy, and it works. Which is, I think all great things on planet Earth start with people. Great people produce great products. Great products produce great profits. And then if you're really good, you take those profits, you go get more great people, and you let that cycle spin. If you look at Google, Apple, Facebook, LVMH, I can keep going through. This is a formula, and I'm sure
People,
others.
product, profit.
Yeah, 3 Ps. By the way, you'll notice I say profits, not revenues.
Yeah.
Revenues, and people will try to hide behind revenue, especially growth of revenues at the expense of profits, and it'll catch up to you eventually. Profits are a very good, because profits are a measure of value and impact. Quite frankly, you can choose to give away profits. That's okay, or reinvest them, but you better generate profits. So I use those. That's been my formula from since I left the Boston Consulting Group in when did we take Amazon public? Before Amazon went public. Now, geographically, I use the same formula. However, I position those formulas in the context of the country. If you look at it at emerging countries, and we were very early in China. Remember, we built EachNet, I mentioned earlier, which became eBay China. If you look at China is a great example of that. The first wave, typically, of that in emerging markets are what we call replication. People will call them copying, copycats, cheating, stealing. But I politically correct will call it replication. The first wave will be, this stuff exists in the US, we can do that here. So you'll hear companies go on about, well, we are the eBay of China, or we are the Facebook of China. Well, that's all interesting. What happens, though, as a country is evolving macroeconomically, the next wave is typically localization. You start to engineer things in for that market that are specific to that market that wouldn't work anywhere else. So, for example, when we did EachNet in China, we had this thing called real names. That means everybody that came onto the platform, if you gave us your real name and your national ID, which we can check in China because the national police would allow us to check it, you got a first star. And we knew you were a verified user. You couldn't do that in the US. So you start to see localization comes into place. And then the third is major innovation. I could give you an example. In China, with WeChat, China pioneered the use of mobile technologies, mobile messaging, QR codes, all these technologies today that were important. Those were all innovations, global innovations in China. So you take this 3 Ps that I mentioned, and you apply it based on where in that evolution is that local market. And you can start to flesh out our companies. If a company is looking too far, too fast, probably not a good idea. If a company is going to have the market pass it by, probably not a good idea. But it all comes down to people, how they see themselves in that localization, and how you invest in them. So that's a common principle. And why did I do China, Russia? I think part of it has to do with my fascination for the next thing. I get bored by the past. I have no interest in the past. The present, even for me, is just a proxy as a gateway to the future. So I actually don't spend that much time in the present either. I love the future.
Are you all over India? Are you all over India now?
To be honest, no, but I will be, in large part because I mentioned this impact in this life sciences space that we're working on. Probably the most important technology I've ever seen in my life, and the potential to create the most impactful company I've ever seen. And not I, but our team, brilliant group of scientists and business folks. And I really hope we succeed.
When does this go live? Do we get an exclusive?
Well, I'm not sure about an exclusive, but yes, we're very much in stealth right now, and but it will have a very, very significant impact because some of the issues that India, Africa, China experience around access and availability of drugs and treatments, we can solve those problems. You wouldn't need to, for example, think about a COVID vaccine. An mRNA COVID-based vaccine has to go through what's called a cold supply chain. Then it needs a clinician to insert a hypodermic needle into your arm, into intramuscular tissue, which is, by the way, completely brain dead in terms of how to deliver that vaccine. There's a way more effective way to do it in solid state. That's not a pill or a needle or something like that. And so imagine you getting that equivalent of that, but via UPS, the equivalent of UPS, or from your village elder. So we are revolutionizing how the body actually deals with treatments. But the impact of the edge is that the whole supply chain behind it is impacted. And as a function of that, we are going to be very impactful in places like India and China and Africa and some of the less well-established infrastructure countries.
You heard it. You heard it first in Indian Explorers podcast. If you remember the name Carlos Bhola. Yeah. Carlos, this was as expected, tough on the mind. I'm going to take a nap after this to take a break. Always intellectually challenging and excited to speak with you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for the opportunity you gave me when I was 21. And I hope we continue this relationship we have for decades to come.
I would inversely say thank you for having me, but most importantly, thanks for all the gifts you've given me over our relationship, Amit, and our new relationship, Sabrina. Thank you guys very much. Keep doing the great work you are, and please keep impacting the world.
Thank you. I'm going to say the opposite of Amit. I feel for me, it was more intellectually stimulating. And I've really enjoyed this conversation. I think you're a brilliant mind and a brilliant soul. And I hope you can mentor me as well someday. So thank you so much, everyone. This has been a very, very enriching conversation. Another episode of Indian Explorers. And I would be surprised if you didn't feel the same way. So please subscribe, please share it. And thank you for joining us today.
Cheers.